So, welcome everybody to this 10th webinar event by IENE. And this series of webinars obviously focuses on the post-coronavirus situation in the energy world, especially European energy markets. And we come to discuss a very important issue today, which is the situation regarding gas in Europe and Southeast Europe more specifically. Of course, we had a webinar 3 weeks ago where we discussed East Mediterranean gas markets, but now we are broadening this discussion, not only East Mediterranean, but Southeast Europe, including Turkey, West Balkans, Bulgaria, Romania, Central Europe, and the situation with the competition with LNG and pipe gas, the difficulties experienced in opening up gas markets, opening up further gas markets in Europe in view of the very strong opposition by Brussels, and the rift which I see developing between North and South, in the sense that the north part of Europe and Central Europe, part of Central Europe, have developed gas infrastructures and gas markets, whereas most countries in Southeast Europe and the southern part of Europe generally, we have markets still developing and infrastructure still to be completed. Only very recently we had the launch of the Turk Stream, which started bringing gas in from Russia to Turkey and through Turkey to the rest of Southeast Europe. And in a matter of weeks, we're going to have the TAP pipeline coming on stream, delivering further gas quantities from Azerbaijan. And on top of that, we have a big pressure from LNG because prices have dropped. The big industrial users and electricity users are obviously preferring LNG. So we have an additional pressure point there and competition with pipe gas. So we have a lot of very interesting issues developing in parallel. And I think we have the right experts across the board, colleagues whom we have worked together or we have been together in conferences. We know very much the work they're doing, and we think they are the most capable people to participate in this high-level discussion to see where European gas markets, and especially Southeast European gas markets, are heading. Where are we heading? So with this short introduction, I would like to give the floor to Milan Zdravković, who I'm trying to get around this table for some time now, but obviously we had really adverse weather conditions in Serbia, and he was called to duty last time. But here is your chance, Milan, to come into the discussion.
Thank you, Costis, my dear friend. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm, as always, privileged to join you in more or less interesting topics. Unfortunately, I believe that all the time we have the opportunity to discuss about the interesting topics. We are very hard to be bored about the issues that we are also planning today to exchange at least our thoughts. So I don't know what would be the proper Costis for the starting issues to discuss about, but generally you described some and mentioned some perspectives which I'm sure that we all agree are significantly differ from the aspect of the, let's say, the territory or our point of interest we are speaking about. So I strongly support your your thoughts regarding the different positions of the this region that we are speaking from, not only mentioning West Balkans, but as well the Southeast Europe, and the scenarios that we are facing. Unfortunately, now we are facing with a multitasking scenario, which is not only the strategy announced from the Brussels recently, but as well this occasion of the functioning in the most specific circumstances regarding this COVID scenario, which I'm afraid is still unpredictable and definitely is going to result with some less desired occasions and results influencing on not only the economy, but in the same time also the companies dealing with energy.
If I could, Milan, if I could intervene at this stage, could I please ask you to describe us the situation in Serbia with regard to the slump in demand, obviously experienced during the lockdown, and how is demand developing now? I mean, obviously there is a pickup in demand, but how, and what are the prospects? What is your feeling?
Well, probably it's still early to discuss according to some materialized reports, because we are now facing an experience of let's say 3 months. The major impact, I believe, and unfortunately, is to come. So actually now it's obvious that the less demand is coming from the major consumers, speaking, for example, heavy industry and the other industry consumers, which obviously cuts down the consumption. We have this obvious, for example is steel factory, which is one of the biggest consumers on our system. So in this city of Smederevo, it actually significantly decreased the consumption. So what's going to be next, we'll see. In Serbia, it's in the same time, it's the structure of the consumption is particular, but I'm sure that it's not unique, speaking about the region on Balkans. So we have a great discrepancy between summer and winter regime of consumption. So we'll see. I need to be optimistic from the point of view of consumption for the winter, where the most energy is used for the heating purposes and in the winter regime. But nevertheless, these circumstances about decreasing the consumption, it's more realistic to expect. Right now, it's not dramatic, but there are no signs that it's going to be increased, let's say, in the future.
I mean, what is your prognosis as far as demand returning to previous levels? I mean, when do you expect to see that, in 6 months or a year? Obviously, you must have thought about this at SRBIJAGAS.
Well, yes. I don't know. Now we can only speak about it. Let's say the assumptions can make it on different ways. Are we going to be highly optimistic, moderate, or let's not be pessimistic about it? But at least what's going on right now, also not only in Serbia, but it's obvious as well in the region, it is an unexpected scenario where everywhere it was expected that in the summer season, the epidemic situation would be much in a lower intensity than it is now. So it's making some new bad prospects, let's say, regarding the situation, what's going to happen, you know, because it's becoming really unpredictable.
Okay.
Right now, to be concrete on the answering your question is, right now, I think we still are dealing, at least in Serbia, with a low to moderate expectation of the disturbance of, let's say, of the consumption presently. But what's going to be next, because the consumption in Serbia, speaking about the industry, is of course related to the economy state in the Europe, because most of these products are exported, and the demand is the great impact, has the great impact on the facilitation of these.
Okay. All right, Milan. I will now switch and will go to Julian. Julian, you have been at BB for many years. You have been closely monitoring and watching the market. You have been very active in the field in terms of infrastructure and gas markets. And now you see this, I think the gas market picture a little from the outside without the pressures of specific duties in a company. So you can afford to take a cooler view. So how do you view developments, first of all, in view of the severe drop in demand and the prospects of really slowing resumption, as Milan says, who is a market operator? And secondly, on gas competition. I mean, competition is coming from all sides, as we can see, but on top of that, we have a situation of low demand. So we have low demand and competing forces. It's a very unusual situation. Can you please comment on this?
Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think, well, let's talk about the European picture first.
Yeah.
And what the outlook for Europe is this year. And I think it's important to remember that this year was probably going to be weak anyhow for the gas market, because we came through a mild winter. We had so demand was down for heating. On top of that, because of wind in particular, the contribution of renewables to the electricity mix was very high, and so demand was already weakening as we came through the winter. And then of course COVID-19 happens to on an already weakening market. The Oxford assessment at the moment is that we've seen demand down in Europe by about 8% in the first 5 months of the year. And if you take if you say, well, what does that mean for the rest of the year? Then the Oxford view is something remaining in that range, something over the year of -7%, -8%. But I think it depends. If you say that's compared with last year, but if you go back 3-4 years to 2014 and 15. Demand, even though it is depressed in 2020, it is still higher than it was in those years. So I think it's important. The important point is, where's your reference point? If it's against last year, then the market is very weak. If it's against the market, say 5 years ago, it isn't quite so weak. And then I think the other part of your question on that is recovery. Is it going to recover next year, or are we permanently into through the short and medium term in a very weak position in the market? Plenty of supply, low demand, and prices obviously are reflecting that and are very weak at the moment. And I think it's indicative that a lot of people do think that we are in for a weak market situation through at least the medium term. And I think the evidence for this is that many companies have publicly downgraded their expectations when they do their investment forecasts, their investment analysis, many companies have now downgraded their view on the oil price and certainly the gas price. BP have done it, Shell have done it. I noticed that yesterday IENE also did it.
Yeah.
So I think everybody is now using lower pricing assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
I think I made a note of the IENE one somewhere, but while they're all slightly different, they're all saying much the same thing.
We see there is a trend in the market.
IENE yesterday, for instance, came out with in their pricing assumptions, they've taken oil from $70 to $60 from 2023. Gas, they've taken down from nearly $8 down to, €8 down to 5.5 euros. So quite a big decrease there. But that's much in line also with what BP, with what Shell have done, and doubtless other people as well. So I think the market generally is expecting weakness through the medium term. There's as a consequence of low demand and high supply, storage levels are very high, and it will take some time to work through those. So the expectation generally is weak prices, meaning actually very low prices through the medium term at least.
Okay, Julian, I think your analysis was spot on. It was very useful and explains a lot of things. I would now like to go to Boyana Achovski, who is the Secretary General at Gas Infrastructure Europe, based in Brussels. And of course, while demand is low and probably is going to remain low for some time, we have infrastructure there, and some of the infrastructure is incomplete. With final investment decisions taken or have just started construction, like some interconnectors. And on top of that, we have a very negative climate at the European Commission against gas and against gas expansion in terms of use. So where do we stand as far as infrastructure is concerned, Boyana?
Yes, thank you, Costis. Thank you very much for inviting GIE to this timely debate. Of course, our perspective is to look on everything that is happening nowadays in Brussels and all the policy willingness and the targets that needs to be achieved after the Paris Agreement and after the Green Deal. The targets are very, very clear. We need to have a contribution towards the goals by 2050. The focus of the debate is on the European level of the ambition in terms of emission reduction targets across different European member states and the different pathways to achieve such targets. But so the ambition and the willingness is quite clear. The question here is, as the debate is more or less focused now today on the role of the natural gas, is that our opinion in this perspective is that, of course, achieving a carbon neutral economy by 2050 requires to have a really considerable efforts and needs to and commitment of all the member states and stakeholders in the European Union. So what we are taking into consideration here, there is a clear differences in the current energy mix in the member states. So we as an association which represent Western Europe, Eastern Europe, where you have indeed the differences, we believe that it's very important that the decarbonization transition takes into account the regional differences within the European Union, and also the potential and the ambition of each individual member state to reach the targets in a cost-effective way, and the flexibility, let's say, to apply a different pathways towards such kind of ambitions and the targets by 2050. Here, of course, at the same time, it is important to consider that the European Union energy policy has the three main pillars. That was something that It's very important on the policy perspective. We are here talking about sustainability, we talk about security, we talk about competitiveness. And in order to realize the target of the sustainability, which is the target, it is also of high importance that the two other pillars, which is the security of supply and the competitive pricing, should not be jeopardized, let's say. So we really think here that it is imperative that cost-effective way to significantly reduce emissions are included in the short and in the midterms in parallel to the developments of innovative low-cost and low-carbon solutions.
Okay, if I could interrupt you at this stage, what do you think is going to be the impact of all this we just described on infrastructure? I mean, are we going to see a continuation of infrastructure projects, or are we going to see an abrupt end, as some people in Brussels now want?
Why I'm saying this in relation to the difference between the European countries is the fact that in any case, in the European Green Deal, the natural gas is recognized as a transition fuel, right? So in this perspective, it's very much important to take into consideration that many countries in the eastern part of Europe, in the Balkans, are very much needed to have a security of supply, a kind of measures to take into consideration the infrastructure. So there will be still need for financial contribution, whatever it's needed in this part of the European Union.
Okay, look, we have a very important issue which affects directly infrastructure, which you're concerned. I mean, early in June, late May, early June, 8 countries of members of the European Union sent a very strong letter to the European Commission. And these countries included Bulgaria, Czechia, Greece, Hungary, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, really challenging the decision of the European Commission and subsequently of EIB, barring EIB to fund further infrastructure projects. So are you supporting this view?
Well, this is an initiative by a couple of members indeed of Europe, which are still need to have such kind of support, right? So we're representing a little bit more broader picture of member states, which are also very much so the other part of, so the Western Europe is very much focused on innovative solutions and hydrogen. But for this perspective, what we really insist and believe that there is still untapped potential to achieve the fast emission reduction with the switch from carbon intensive fuels such as coal, lignite, and heavy fuel towards low emissions by using natural gas. So we are fully recognizing the role that natural gas is a source of energy that can be used in order to provide the efficient energy transformation. Broader use of gas in the electricity, could be in heating, in industrial and transport, both in maritime, in land, is one of the ways of limiting the greenhouse gas emissions. So we fully see a role for natural gas in this perspective. Okay,
thank you very much. I will now go to David Tang in Istanbul.
Sorry, before you continue, can I just intervene, add a small intervention on that question you asked? It was quite interesting that on the one hand, Brussels is saying this, and banks, there was a fear that the banks would stop lending on infrastructure projects. Last week, the EIB did a loan to Lithuania for its section of the Baltic grid, 65 million euros. So there is perhaps a difference between theory and practice, between political aspiration and reality. On the evidence of last week, the banks are still lending. And my view is that as long as you can prove that what you're doing improves security of supply and helps build market in a wide sense, then we're actually seeing a more kind of business as usual scenario. with a few more conditions on it.
What you're saying, Julian, is very encouraging. Yes, and this is how things should be. You know, they should be judged on their specific merits. And you know, now going to David Tang in Istanbul. Now, David, first of all, thank you very much for coming into this in short notice. You're in a very pivotal position. I mean, Istanbul has always been pivotal geographically and politically, right? Now, you're even more pivotal because since the start of this year, we have the operation of Turk Stream, and a lot of more gas is coming through that. Of course, most of this is replacing gas, which was actually coming through the Trans-Balkan pipeline. But nevertheless, I mean, this new major infrastructure project opens a lot of new opportunities. How can you comment on this?
You have to unmute your microphone, please.
Now we can hear you, yes. We can't hear you. You have to
unmute your microphone on the bottom left of your screen.
Yeah.
I'd like to come to Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
I think there's a line problem. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, I'll try.
Yes.
I'll try. I think, okay, could I come to Russian gas after just quickly saying how Turkey's dealt with coronavirus?
Yes.
And therefore, how much gas it's been importing.
Yeah.
Because we've had a lot of trouble with the coronavirus really from the first week of April, and we saw a 17% collapse in economic activity, collapse in gas demand, down 26% in April, 4%. This is on a year-on-year basis, down again in May. And the result is that we've got a lot of a continuing collapse in gas demand, which has meant and has been accompanied by the sabotage on the line from Iran, which stopped all imports from Iran from the 31st of March till about the 31st of June. It was a very cunning, crafty sabotage, which did quite clever damage. In this process, the celebrations about the opening of Turk Stream have been very muted, because we've seen that the private sector has only been importing at 38% of its minimum contract quantity, and potash at only 60% of its minimum contract quantity. So there are major take-or-pay issues coming, and a considerable underutilization of this line, which at my estimate is running at about 40% of capacity. Very disappointing for Gazprom indeed, after that technical brilliance. It was a well-managed and well-implemented project. I think there's other things going on. We've got new talks of a floating LNG storage tanks being added to the network in the Aegean area. TAP, you said in a few weeks. I thought it was the end of the year, but good if it's going to be earlier, but it may be a partial solution in Greece and then complete integration by the end of the year. And then next year, we've got a third of Turkey's long-term gas contracts expiring, and probably not going to be extended. And so we got major changes in import structure, but no major changes at the moment in the role of potash, which continues to be a predominant player with something like 90% of the market. Okay. So it's a very interesting situation. I think, let's be metaphysical and talk about hubs and things like that. Let's just talk about how is it going to work out. At the moment, Turkey is paying a lot for its gas. It's not had the price reductions which Bulgaria and Greece have had from Gazprom. In fact, it's continuing to import from Gazprom at about $5.5 to $6 per MMBTU, which is much higher than its local stuff. And it's importing a massive amount of spot. Spot was something like 28% of its imports in April, and LNG was 45%. So this reliance on LNG is something which looks as if it's going to come at the ignoring of contract obligations. And it's I don't know how it's happening. I've been waiting for Gazprom to exercise its political strengths in Turkey in the gas market. It's doing so perhaps by giving a very late price reduction, but it's not doing so in other ways at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you very much, David. This is very exact account of what's happening. Could you please repeat the prices? You said that Turkey's Botas is importing from Russia. Was it 5 or 6? I didn't hear well.
Oh, it's about 5.5. I think from July onwards, I think it's going to be about 5.
Okay, we can't hear you now. I would now like to go to Charles. Charles, can you hear me? Yes?
Mute? Yes, I can hear you.
Right. David Tonge mentioned this, and I'm sure you know it much better. And we see it here every day in Greece, where about 65% of our imports over the last 2-3 months have come from LNG. With these main suppliers buying Russian gas over long-term contracts, really ignoring take-or-pay conditions, as David Tonge said very clearly for Turkey. So the same thing is happening in Greece, for the simple reason that it makes a lot more sense to import cheap LNG, even if you were to pay the penalty for piped gas. So I know this issue has been of your concern for some time, and you have been crying wolf for several years now, saying, especially with regard to East Med, that the prices, the current prices and foreseeable prices are quite unsustainable, make unsustainable the East Med project and infrastructure projects of this scale. So please, can you take this discussion a little further up and enlighten us on this issue?
I mean, these changes in prices, the low cost of LNG, I believe it's going to be long term. The reason is that there are many projects that received FID last year, and quite a few projects are still under construction for liquefaction and export, especially in the United States. And as we know, Qatar LNG has also confirmed that it will increase its LNG capacity by 2025 and more by 2027, adding about another 50 million tons per annum to its production capacity. All of these mean that there is a lot of LNG still to come into the market, and the growth in demand, it's not guaranteed. Demand is going to grow, but that is also under threat at the moment because of mainly because of economic reasons. China and India don't want to import gas if they can avoid it. They still go and commit to more coal projects, as well as security of supplies. So this oversupply of LNG, I see that continuing for most of this decade, and prices remaining low for most of the decade. if prices remain low, that don't mean they will stay at $2. They will increase from $2 and maybe become $4 or even $5 by 2023. The price weakness will remain with us for about 2 years, I believe, and maybe by 2023 we'll get back to some kind of normality. But gas prices will not increase to the point of making this Med gas pipeline commercially viable. And in fact, the whole of the East Med is under threat as a result of this changing situation. The fact that there is too much gas and LNG in the world makes the development of gas fields in Cyprus, in Lebanon, export of gas from Israel challenging. The only country in the East Med that can succeed is Egypt, and mostly because of its vast internal market. So it's a changing situation in this Med, and it's driven by this fact that gas prices, I believe, will remain low for long. And if you mentioned before the Julian mentioned before the changes in pricing mechanisms by the IOCs, they have reduced their expectations on prices for oil, they have reduced their expectations on prices for gas. And if you look at these expectations, they are now much lower than ever before. These low prices do not help East Med in developing its resources. And as a result, the future for the East Med is more regional and local rather than export to global markets. But there are many other things happening that are affecting us. And the developments right now in Europe, and today we will hear more about from the European Commission on hydrogen. We heard from Germany recently about the commitments to hydrogen and all of these things. But at the same time, last week, the International Energy Agency issued a new report on energy innovation. And I want to mention that because it has a bearing. So the IEA concluded that out of all of the technologies that are being developed right now for clean energy, only 6 out of 46 have a chance to go far enough to make meaningful impact. And they are warning us that all these plans about net zero and commitments to 2050 and so on are under challenge unless a lot of investment is being put into developing these things now, immediately. But that investment is not coming. As you know, even the European Union Recovery Fund, which is 750 million euros over the next 3 years, it's going in a different direction. The compromise between the various countries and the European Commission is that the countries can use these funds to develop sustainable projects, but at their own discretion, without any involvement from the European Commission. The European Commission cannot tell them you cannot use it and so on. That means that not as much money will be diverted to clean energy projects. So a lot of people who keep talking about net zero to 2050 talk about this almost if it's going to happen. Somehow it's going to happen tomorrow or 2050. How we get there, I have not seen anybody explain step by step how do we get there. And certainly India and China are not going there at all. They're going a different direction. So I believe that gas, let me just conclude. I believe that gas is going to be with us for a long time. And policy confusion in Europe is not helping at all. We need policy clarity so that gas can be there as needed when it's needed.
Charles, I'm really grateful that you brought out you pointed out this IEA report, which I have also read very carefully. And in fact, we presented this last week through the IENE website, because what you're saying is absolutely right. In fact, IEA has identified 400 technologies which are possible but not viable, out of which, as you say, 6 have a priority. Now, one of these technologies has to do with CCS, CCU, which is the carbon capture mechanism. And I'm turning my attention now to Milan, because Milan, who is really a transmission operator at the same time, I believe so, really knows how to handle the gas. And I think Serbia has managed to develop over the last few years very reliable storage capacity in gas, which is very useful when it comes to organize the markets. But I've heard through my friends at NIS and IES that they have also developed a carbon capture mechanism, and they are running a pilot project. Do you know anything about this, Milan?
Well, yes, it's true. Unfortunately, I don't have some wide information report regarding this. There is a facility close to Belgrade in Pančevo where they are implementing this. Of course, we are speaking about pilot project, so these capacities are not to be treated as a major one, but it's a very good, let's say, recognized interest from the particular company to deal with this issue. But I would like to use the opportunity to get back a little bit regarding the comments we heard from our colleagues. First of all, I would like to use something which Boyana mentioned, and this is, she named it as ambition. So we are obviously in a gap between ambition and reality on one hand, and on the other hand, Julian also mentioned it, we cannot avoid the high influence of the policy or geopolicy, however we are going to call it and name it. Because yes, I fully agree that LNG offer these days is very attractive for the individual consumers, and this is something which open market, of course, is based on. But on the other hand, especially when you're mentioning and speaking about the interest for the East Med, on the other hand, I strongly believe that especially the countries and the region that we are coming from needs to also to take care about the energy security. Because something which is now present and preferable doesn't mean for the longer term to be the best solution. So everything at least needs to have price. What we are facing right now, there are unfortunately a lot of bizarre situations. That's why I mentioned policy and emotion, let's say, involved in all this. Very recently, there was also some kind of meeting that we are now having with from the Energy Community Secretariat regarding the so-called projects of energy community interest, PETSI, or however you pronounce it. So it's very interesting that according to the grading of the latest grading that independent consultant made regarding the nominated projects for the Western Balkans and the energy community region, interconnector Bulgaria-Serbia suddenly was ranked very low. Named that there is recognized literally zero benefit of this project. And I asked, can you please explain, because it's really unusual to face with this so drastic marking or evaluating some project. And the explanation was, yes, because the maturity of the extension of the Turk Stream project, which goes from Bulgaria through Serbia to Hungary, makes this project as it was recognized from their side. And I said, okay, but what we are going to do, for example, with the LNG facilities, that present LNG facilities in Greece, and the future one in Alexandroupolis? And the answer was, Yes, but according to the rules, there was a third-part access to this interconnector Bulgaria-Hungary through Serbia. So if you want LNG, so you should use this pipeline instead of this. So it makes a confusion, and I strongly believe that it has everything to do, but not the technical and economic reasons why to do this. You mentioned on your opening remarks about the questionability of availability of the financing or co-financing support from the institutions, European institutions, IB or whatever. And this is something which is really needed in this moment, because however, if we are going for, speaking for the region, we are going to use the sources from LNG, from otherwise, still pipelines are needed.
Thank you very much, Milan. In fact, we have a question on this very issue. And of course, which I'll come out in a minute, but what you just mentioned really bodes very well with what Charles said earlier, who says, right now we have policy confusion at EU level, including energy community. What we need is policy clarity. So a market player asks this very question. Mr. Pivos Skylides, he says, the EIB will end financing for fossil fuel energy projects from the end of 2021, and the EU seems to exclude gas from its Just Transition Fund. Are the underground gas storage project in Kavala and the FSRU in Alexandroupolis going to be affected? Question. So here we are. I mean, people in the industry, you know, are really already asking these questions. So this creates a rather uncertain climate. It increases policy confusion, and I think the ball is now on EU's EC's courtyard. They will have really somehow to clarify the position if we are to go to move smoothly to the energy transition which we have entered, and if we are going to use gas as a main fuel of the energy transition. So, Julian, which you continue to have a much cooler view, I think, from anybody here, because you see things in a very objective way. Please, what are your thoughts on this issue? The need
Question of infrastructure.
The need for further clarity in terms of EU policy.
Yeah, I think that. Well, I think you're absolutely right, because we've already mentioned the confusion on bank lending.
Right.
Is it on or is it off? And certainly on the evidence of last week, it's on. But I think if you look at Southeast Europe, I think there is a question of, well, let's go back a couple of years and think about the CESEC initiative, which started in 2015, and it had some 9 priority projects, including the interconnector between Bulgaria and Serbia, including Alexandroupolis, including the interconnector between Greece and Bulgaria, and so on. And so I think the question is how do these haven't been delivered yet. So I think one question certainly that is relevant here is how do these things fit into the current market situation, and how do they fit into a world where LNG would need to be moved inland to make the expansion viable? So, for instance, clearly Alexandroupolis is not needed for the Greek market. It is therefore a regional facility, and it's therefore interesting that the Bulgarians are now participating in it in a small way. So I think in order to allow a lot of these projects to happen, and you can argue them from again a security of supply and a market building perspective, then for these projects to work, you need infrastructure inland to move that LNG. You need infrastructure to move the gas from Greece somewhere else. Equally, you need the infrastructure to move the Croatian LNG somewhere else. So I think there are two elements to this. I think you do need some physical infrastructure to do this, and you certainly need the regulatory infrastructure to be enforced to allow it to happen. Whether it all happens or not, I think depends on the cost of transportation. Are the costs of transportation, which look particularly high when the commodity price is low, are those costs going to be too high to allow movement of gas, LNG inland, to make it delivered at an acceptable price when it reaches that destination? Or is all this going to happen in a regulatory point of view, in terms of swaps and virtual deliveries? And I think that question is still out there. I do think there is some policy confusion and on all this, and certainly some confusion on what projects the EU now really need to see happening. I think it is legitimate to say that in a fully functioning market where regulatory regime of the third package is applied properly, whether you do need an interconnector between Bulgaria and Serbia, as well as TurkStream. Because in a way, third package applied to TurkStream gives you the Bulgaria-Serbia interconnector. So I think there are legitimate questions to ask about how this and other projects do work in this new world. But I'm firmly of a belief that some infrastructure needs still to be built to complete the internal market, to give security of supply, and certainly to physically move the LNG from the coastal terminals inland.
Yes, Julian, thank you very much. I think you're really completing the picture, which started from what Milan said about the strange requirements by energy community on gas interconnectors, and how interconnectors play a very vital part in achieving a competitive price, a competitive market in Southeast Europe. Now we're having the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector eventually under construction. Hopefully it will be completed by the end of next year. So this will provide a channel, a very interesting, very north-south channel, to bring fresh gas to Bulgaria other than Russian gas, and also to Romania and to Serbia. Somehow this will have to be accommodated within the current regulatory regime. And of course, unless the regulator had agreed, these pipelines would never have started. I mean, the Greece-Bulgaria under construction, and I think the Bulgaria-Serbia, Milan, is it already under construction or is due to start?
It's actually due to start because there is a construction permit available, but it's still pending on the final approval of the tender dossier for construction works. And this I'm speaking about the Serbian side.
Okay.
And of course, European Investment Bank.
At this stage, I would like to welcome John Roberts. Hello, John. Welcome. We can't hear you. John?
You have to unmute your microphone from the bottom left of your screen.
A very rapid appearance.
While John is sorting himself out, just one point to make is I think one of the most interesting developments in Southeast Europe region, certainly last year, was the ability of Bulgaria to receive LNG from Greece.
Right. Yes.
This was of the differences it made in the Bulgarian balance were actually considerable. Bulgaria went from 0 non-Russian gas to almost a quarter of its supply being LNG received through Greece.
Okay.
And the way that that your Greece TSO and the Bulgarian TSO managed to do that, I thought was really quite impressive.
In the past,
in a European sense, the volumes are very small, but in the regional Southeast Europe context, I thought that was a very exciting development.
John, I don't know whether you have been following the discussion or we have just come in, but anyway, we are discussing the main issues affecting European gas markets, and especially Southeast Europe. A lot of new gas is coming into the area through Turks, LNG, but at the same time, we have a drop in demand and we have a drop in prices. So we have an issue here, and the issue also is affecting the suppliers. Gazprom has to drop a lot of their prices. LNG suppliers also have to drop a lot of the prices. And my question to you, John, is how are we going to, or how suppliers are going, either in pipe gas delivery or LNG, how they're going to ensure their viability, their commercial viability, so that they can continue providing the product?
They're going to have problems. We already know that Egypt has ceased deliveries of LNG. I think that the real question is going to be whether the cost of renewables continues to fall to such an extent that whenever, and I don't expect it till next year, energy demand picks up, the slack is taken by renewables rather than by existing fossil fuels, and in this case, particularly gas. It doesn't look to be a good picture for gas. And the only question is whether some gas suppliers are in effect prepared to undercut renewables, essentially for political, or you could say for very long-term economic and commercial reasons. That is the kind of thing that if a gas producer has got deep pockets, such as Russia and Gazprom, it could contemplate doing on the grounds that preservation of a market is worth supplying gas at below normal commercial levels for a period of time. But you'd have to have very deep pockets for that, and lesser gas suppliers will go out of the market in international terms, or like Egypt, it will simply go into the domestic market.
Yeah, I think what you said describes the situation, and of course, you are pessimistic about the role of some lesser suppliers, like I agree with you on that. And so, in other words, over the next few months, we may see some very unpleasant developments concerning suppliers and their ability to continue functioning and supplying the market. And of course, you mentioned renewables. Yes, but is this going to be a real alternative for a say, very traditional gas supplier like Gazprom getting into renewables, or did I not understand well?
No, I think, first of all, this is, as it were, a short to a medium term issue.
Right.
I don't want to take it, I wouldn't want to take it beyond, as it were, a year from now. The next thing is, of course, we haven't considered the role of gas in renewables. I don't know if you discussed the question of hydrogen earlier. I did miss the opening section.
We have not yet discussed hydrogen, no.
I mean, Gazprom certainly is looking at the question of providing gas as a feedstock for hydrogen. Austria is certainly very engaged in that. There is obviously a future for this, but I have no idea yet how big a future. There are times when people talk of multiple increases in terms of the use of hydrogen. I have no idea how realistic that is, but it's certainly going to be something that's going to be in the forefront of the minds of gas producers. Namely, how can they use gas to take a share of a market that may be driven as much for political as commercial reasons towards renewables.
Okay, so I suppose the interconnection or the connection between renewables and gas will come through the production of hydrogen from low-cost renewables and the use of hydrogen by gas suppliers to implant this, to insert this to a certain small percentage to the main gas distribution network. Is that right?
There are two different ways in which it can be done. One is that you can insert, it appears on current studies, up to around 20% of hydrogen into the existing gas system. The other question is, do you build entirely hydrogen pipeline systems so that you're running 100% hydrogen? Now, I'm not competent to judge as to which way you go, but you can be sure that the gas companies will be studying both options, possibly insertion of hydrogen into the existing system as a way of getting started, and then seeing whether it is necessary to build wholly dedicated hydrogen distribution systems.
So this leads us to the point that Charles mentioned earlier, which stems out from the IEA Innovation Technology Review, of the need for innovation, but the need to start doing things now so that we can have solutions in 5 to 10 years. And of course, hydrogen was one of the technologies, but different types of hydrogen and delivery mechanisms which were identified in the IEA report. So, Charles, would you like to comment on this, please?
Well, I mean, for a start, the big program that may give hydrogen a chance is in Germany. Germany has made a huge commitment of about 7 billion euros to be invested over the next 10 years in developing green hydrogen using renewables to develop hydrogen out of without using gas. That seems to be a very concrete proposal with a chance to succeed. At the same time, there are other techniques based on converting gas to hydrogen, and obviously Gazprom is one of the companies that is developing a technique called pyrolysis, which converts gas under very high temperature into hydrogen and solid carbon, so it doesn't release any emissions. That is progressed, and there are there is a small-scale plant working already producing that, but not yet as a prototype and not yet at such low prices that it can become commercially viable. But it has a chance to happen. So there is a commitment for hydrogen in Europe, and as I said, the EU today will be making its own announcements with regards to commitments to hydrogen. So there is within Europe a concerted effort to take the lead in hydrogen technology. And there are competing projects in North America, in Japan, in China. So I believe that within the next 10 years, hydrogen may become one of the technologies to develop at a stage where it can be used quite commercially. But even then, the requirements are daunting. Basically, where is it? I had a note somewhere. The European Union, the IEA said that if hydrogen is to contribute meaningfully over the next to 2050, you more or less have to have a hydrogen plant coming into operation between now and 2050, one every week from now. A full-blown hydrogen plant operating at full capacity between now and 2050 every week. That isn't going to happen. So hydrogen is going to come in, but it's not going to provide the solutions needed for this conversion, for this transition into net zero. And that's why I mentioned before that often we talk about getting there, but not how. And hydrogen is a possibility, it's not the answer. And the same applies to many of the other technologies. If you read the IEA Innovation Report, it talks about similar problems with, for example, bioenergy. It says that, again, with bioenergy, you need 2 plants to come into operation every week from now on for years to come. It's not going to happen. So yes, renewables, clean energy is going to be part of the equation. It's not going to be the full answer. And let me go back to China again, just because China, everybody keeps talking about these things, only with regards to Europe. Europe, let's not forget, it only uses about 9% of the global energy. Most of the energy is used in India and China. China is going full out on renewables, but it's also going full out on coal and production of gas from its own gas fields and so on, and nuclear because of the massive increase in energy needs. And as a result, we are not going to go away from fossil fuels, from oil and gas for a long time to come. And that's why I keep coming back to this reality that it's not what we do in Europe that really matters alone. It's not enough. It's what happens in the rest of the world that matters. And the national oil companies, we keep talking about the IOCs, but the national oil companies out there are not changing their tune. They're carrying on as if nothing is happening, carrying on developing gas fields and oil fields. And the world needs that and will need that for another 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Sorry. I wanted to just add a clarification about what was said before, because we left things a bit confused. EIB is committed to stop funding gas projects only from the end of 2021. Up to 2021, they will carry on funding the projects already in their pipeline. This commitment becomes operational from the beginning of 2022.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles, for clarifying this. Of course, what you described about the resilience of gas as a main fuel together with oil over the next few years is absolutely right, in the sense that NOCs now are having the upper hand, and I think they will get more and more the upper hand as Western IOCs very deliberately and in their own volition are giving up on oil and gas. So I see what is happening is a transfer of power from Western IOCs to NOCs.
Let's narrow the choice even further. It's from European IOCs, because the Americans,
correct.
ExxonMobil and Chevron are not changing their tune. Right. In fact, ExxonMobil is on record saying that they are investing a lot more money into oil and gas because they see a long-term future.
Yeah. Okay. So we see the situation that in Europe, out of say political conviction or environmental sensitivities, companies are changing course and decide to give up on oil and gas development and supply, which gladly the NOCs are taking up the challenge and will take eventually the lead. So it's a free gift from Western companies to East and Middle East conglomerates.
You know, Costis, let me add something before John comes in.
Yeah.
I was flabbergasted at Vienna end of last year when one of the high-level Europeans, Klaus Borchardt, who is the Deputy Director General of the European Commission, came and said that please come to Brussels and make your case. You're being pushed by NGOs and activists. Mm-hmm. And you know, all of these things you're talking about, I'm concerned because I heard you say earlier on that all of these countries from Southeast Europe have been pleading for gas, but Brussels is not necessarily going in that direction. And it's mostly because all of the activists and all of the NGOs have gone into Brussels.
That's right.
Shouting the loudest, and because they're shouting the loudest, they're being heard. And European policy that affects all the way to Southeast Europe is being dictated by a lot by activists in Brussels, and to the point that Klaus Borchardt was asking for help for us, for the industry, to go and make our case, because he understands he even said that gas is not. He said himself, gas is not going away. It's going to be there for a lot more years to come. But come and make your case, he said.
Yeah,
it's a sad situation. It's a very sad situation.
Well, I mean, the whole debate has been hijacked, I think, by certain, you know, activists, and we can see that. The question is, how do we react to that? So I think we're running short of time. We had already one question which we answered. Are you having some in common, each one of you? Let's start from Julian and then go to Milan and then end up. So Julian, you have a final statement or comment to make?
I think my final comment is that clearly we're in for some difficult years, at least through the medium term. Personally, I remain optimistic that that we do have a gas future. I think I agree with Charles's view that you know, so much needs to be done on all these other things in order to reach the 2050 goal, and therefore it's not going to happen. I think his image of one hydrogen plant per week is really compelling.
Right. Thank you.
So,
we go to Milan. Milan, please comment.
Well, in a way, I'm glad that we are more or less seeing the situation on the same way, which actually makes the reason why we are speaking about it. Anyway, what do I believe? And I fully agree with Julian. This is something that also I would like to highlight, that gas definitely needs to have the not only middle future, but even beyond it, because speaking again, especially from the point of view from the region, one of the major aspects, I believe, which will drive the further decision making is ecology. And it is coal. Coal is highly used in the region for electricity production. And this is something which each country is going to be faced and pressed, at least from the Energy Community Secretariat, not mentioning the other institutions. The energy solution for this transition or decreasing, not saying elimination, but decreasing, significant decreasing of the coal needs to be sustainable. And on the other aspect, acceptable economically, because you need to take care and to address the social issues in the region and in the area. Population needs to be able to pay for the energy. And I would like to remind you all the experience we had last winter. It was not for the air pollution. It was not only present in Serbia, but it was also present in Sofia, in Zagreb, in all regions. The air was highly polluted. This COVID situation at least brought some pragmatic conclusions and results. For example, in Belgrade, there was, when it was still cold, the traffic was incomparably low comparing to the normal situation. But the air was still polluted, no matter about the present high percentage of the district heating, etc. But single usage of the coal or wood makes the air polluted. So if you want to switch it to the other fuel, it needs to be acceptable. And this is one of the major points I would like to highlight, because we were speaking about the hydrogen. Yes, dear colleagues, I have to remind you or to share with you when last year, when it was firstly presented in Brussels about the Green Deal and the results of the couple of independent studies which recognize low appreciation of gas in this energy future. On the very next month, for example, in St. Petersburg, there was a conference where one of the most competent people from the Gazprom presented the results of the already activities and research activities implementing and producing a hydrogen. But my question would be, somebody needs to pay for this fuel. And this is also something which needs to take care. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Milan. I keep your remark that ecology is of importance. Therefore, the switch from coal to cleaner fuels, and this is where gas has a clear role. And we have been maintaining as an institute that if you really want fast decarbonization, say until the end of 2030, the only way to do it fast and effectively would be through the switch to gas without excluding renewables. Obviously, renewables will have to be developed, but all the base load provided until now through coal will have to be taken over by gas to make the switch. Otherwise, you will end up in the situation you will not have any real base load, and therefore you will not be able to develop further your renewables. Is Boyana hearing us?
Yes, very well.
All right.
I'm listening.
Boyana, would you like to comment on the situation so far?
Well, I cannot agree more with the colleagues, everything that was said so far, and especially on the conclusion. Milan already mentioned how important is something that I started to elaborate a little bit from the beginning. Of course, the security of supply perspective, the use of natural gas, and let's say the still needed increase of the gas infrastructure. But he also talked about the air pollution and the fact that the region is really recognized the important role of the natural gas in the short term, which is supporting the, let's say, the switch from very carbon intensive fuel, switch as coal, lignite, heavy fuel. And of course, the natural gas is very much recognized as the best solution in this perspective. But also in the medium term, let's say the increased use of natural gas in the energy mix can also provide the flexibility that is needed to integrate the increasing share of the renewable energy sources, talking about wind and solar, into the electricity system. by very much guaranteeing the secure and the resilient access to the electricity, to storage, to heat, to mobility for us. And as far as technologies was mentioned, I would like to mention that, of course, the full gas sector and the value chain supports, let's say, the path towards decarbonization, supporting the innovation technologies which continue to support. And we believe that biomethane, hydrogen, synthetic methane, as well as carbon capture, which you also mentioned, and storage, and CCSU technologies can also provide a very good portfolio of solutions which will play a significant role. But we also need to bear in mind that the technologies which are developed so far are really far of bringing us to reaching the goals that Europe would like to have in 2050. So what we are saying here that there is a need of technological neutrality, and really a need not to recognize one technology over the other. And last point here, which is very important, is that such transformation, which is expected in the energy sector, really needs proven technologies, of course, but also solid legislative and investment framework. So here we go to the point that we still need to realize and better understand what kind of investment climate we will need is best to have in the upcoming years to deliver this decarbonization.
Okay, thank you, Boyana. We go to David. David, can you hear us? No? Let's go to Charles. Charles, a closing remark, please. I can't hear you.
You have to unmute, please.
Yeah, no, a very quick remark, because we're repeating each other. I think it's clear that the future for the southeast of Europe and for East Med is a combination of renewables and gas. There is ample renewable capacity in the region, which is not being utilized to the maximum. And there is also access to gas, and access to gas regionally as well. We need to find ways to maximize the use of both. If the East Med forgets about exports to the global markets, which are not going to happen, and concentrates on the region, it might also find ways to resolve the problems that are happening, we have in the region. We haven't talked about the problems, and there's no point in reminding ourselves now. But if part of the reason why these problems are happening is because everybody has this aspiration of becoming rich from gas, which is not going to happen. So if it's not going to happen, what are we fighting for?
Well, everybody believes that it would happen, and you'll be involved somehow.
You know, I'll tell you a brief joke. I was at a meeting with a Turkish Cypriot friend of mine, and I said, it's not going to happen, we're not going to make the money. And he says, I believe you, but what if? And then we went back to the same problems again, and without being able to escape. No, we need to concentrate on the regional use of energy resources and on renewables. In Europe needs to accept to develop a realistic approach to the future based on how explaining and showing clearly how do we get to net zero. Everybody wants the idea of a clean future, but how do you achieve it in a way that we don't end up in between now and then having problems with energy supplies. So these are the realities we need to concentrate on.
But you said, Charles, you said the magic words, which is for me a combination of renewables and gas.
Yeah.
With gas providing the base, and with renewables really taking advantage of a stable electricity production base to develop. And of course, to that, I would add nuclear, because nuclear, which is very sort of misrepresented for a number of reasons, people tend to keep it out of the equation, although we shouldn't forget it's carbon-free, entirely carbon-free.
And that's what the IEA said in its recent report. The IEA said you should never leave nuclear out of the equation, and hydro.
And hydro, correct. So, David, can you hear us? No, I think he's walked away. So we go to John. John.
You can't hear me.
Yes. David.
Who wants to take over? Okay, I'll make my little point,
Okay.
which is that this is a post. We're going to have.
I can't hear you. If you can hear me, I think Turkey is an outlier.
Please, David, speak. We can hear you.
Are driving out. I am speaking. Can you hear me or not? No.
We can hear you now. No problem with the grammy. We have a line problem, I think. So, John, please take over and see if David can join us in the meanwhile.
Okay. We're going to be living with coronavirus probably for the next year or two. It's going to take some time. In that time, a lot of people are going to be focusing on the health aspects, and in particular on the fact that it is, as it were, a breathing illness. Air pollution is going to be high on people's agenda, and therefore on public and governmental agendas for a year or two and beyond. If you couple this with the fact or the supposition that our energy future is not determined in Europe, but is determined by India and China and by what they do, then an enormous question arises. If, and it is a very gigantic if, India and China decide that they need to depollute Beijing and New Delhi and all their megalopolises, then what is the impact on the fossil fuel industry as a whole? It's not just IOCs, it'll be NOCs that will be affected. Europe is fine. We've got basically a balance of resources. We're okay, and we can move much faster to renewables than various other people can. But at the same time, I really do think that we may be overstating the reliance on fossil fuels throughout the world. I quite happily admit I could get this wrong, that this could be wrong. But I do wonder whether the whole focus on health in the next year or two is really going to also shift the balance with regard to thinking about energy.
Can I add a clarification to John's point here? So China right now is investing heavily in coal to the northwest part of the country. They are developing coal in the northwest and transporting electricity through high voltage lines all the way to population center. That way, clean air is guaranteed in population centers, but CO2 emissions do not go down. They're still high because they still produce electricity from coal, but not near cities, far away. So they have this high voltage line capability, which are using to the full to avoid the clean air problems, which are also political problems.
Thank you. John, you mentioned that in the event that India and China are going to move faster on decarbonization, then we are going to have an issue of oil and gas supplies globally. Can you please elaborate on this final point?
First of all, I take Charles's point absolutely. We oughtn't to assume that combating pollution and decarbonization are the same thing.
Right.
They are not. But it does strike me that the overall impact of policies in India, and I think also in China, is we may well see a switch toward a much faster drive towards renewable energy than we anticipate. And if we get that, then what does this do for the commercial market for oil and gas, let alone coal? That's the question I'm posing.
Yeah. Well, this is you know, this is the major energy policy question, I think, for the years to come, until we see what lines China and India are going to take eventually. Well, we are coming to the end of this very interesting get-together, very interesting discussion among dear colleagues and friends. And this is the last webinar in our current series of webinars in view of the summer. And we hope to start them again in September on selected subjects. So I'm sure that all of us somehow are going to meet sooner through webinars and hopefully later in physical terms. So without further ado, I'd like to thank each one of you for your participation and your eagerness and your effort and the very interesting points that you have raised and the documentation of your arguments, which I think was very clear. And with your permission, this will be uploaded tomorrow on the YouTube electronic address we have, IENE has on YouTube. So people will be able to go through this discussion. So thank you very much. I wish you a nice summer. Take some time off. And so we meet again refreshed in September or later. So goodbye from me from Athens, and goodbye to all of you, whatever you are.
Goodbye, Costis. All the best.
Bye.
Have a nice summer. Bye.
Thank you.
All the best to all. Thank you. Bye.
Hi, Milan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.